Louis Armstrong had sung this song 1,000 times before. That night, thousands of strangers sang it back to him, because his microphone couldn't. It happened in the mid-1950s, inside one of the large indoor arenas that had become a regular stop on Armstrong's touring schedule by that point in his career. The kind of venue built for boxing matches and basketball more than music, with rows of seats stretching up into a haze of cigarette smoke near the ceiling, and a stage set up at one end, modest by the standards of the room around it. The hall was sold out, every seat filled, the aisles lined with people standing because there was simply nowhere else to put them, the air thick with the particular energy of a crowd that had been waiting all week for this single night. Armstrong and his band had been playing for nearly an hour by the time they reached the part of the set that, by then, audiences expected and looked forward to most. The songs that had become inseparable from his name, the ones people hummed on their way out of the theater, the ones radio stations played late at night when they wanted to fill a room with something warm. The band moved into one of these numbers, a song built around a simple, rolling melody that had been part of American music for generations before Armstrong ever picked up a horn, but which, by this point, belonged to him in the way certain songs come to belong to certain voices. When the Saints Go Marching In. It was the kind of song that didn't need much introduction. The band knew it. The audience knew it. Armstrong had sung it so many times in so many rooms that the shape of the performance had become almost a ritual. A slow build, a few verses sung straight, and then, gradually, the band opening up, the tempo lifting, the song turning from something quiet into something closer to a celebration. To understand why what happened next mattered, it helps to understand exactly where Louis Armstrong stood in his career and in his relationship with audiences by the mid-1950s. By this point, Armstrong was no longer simply a musician people came to hear. He had become something closer to a fixture, a presence audiences felt they knew personally, even if they had never met him, even if the only times they'd seen his face were on a record sleeve or a black-and-white television screen. His voice, instantly recognizable, had become part of the background of countless American lives, playing in living rooms, in cars, in the kinds of small moments that people don't remember individually but that, added together, create a sense of familiarity with someone they've never actually spoken to. Touring for Armstrong meant moving through a country where, in city after city, strangers greeted him not as a famous person they were meeting for the first time, but as someone whose voice had already been part of their lives for years, at weddings, in kitchens, on long drives, during quiet evenings at home. This familiarity went both ways. Those who toured with Armstrong during this period often remarked on how much he seemed to need the audience as much as they needed him, not in a needy or insecure way, but in the way a conversation needs two people. He didn't simply perform at a crowd. He played with them, watching faces, adjusting the pace of a song based on what he saw in the first few rows, treating a packed arena the same way he might have treated a small club decades earlier, as a room full of people he was, in some sense, talking to. Musicians who played alongside him noted that he rarely performed a song exactly the same way twice, not because he forgot the arrangement, but because each audience, each room, seemed to call for something slightly different, and Armstrong adjusted to that the way other people adjust their voice depending on who they're speaking to. On this particular night, the band had been building toward "When the Saints Go Marching In" for most of the set, the way a long evening sometimes builds toward its most anticipated moment, without anyone announcing it directly. The earlier songs had been strong, warm, well-received, the kind of set that left an audience satisfied even before the highlight arrived. But there was a sense, those who were there remembered, that everyone in the building knew something bigger was coming. Conversations during the earlier songs had a particular hum to them, the sound of people leaning toward each other, saying, "Just wait." The band eased into the song's opening, slow and steady, the way Armstrong always began it, almost like a hymn before it became anything else. Armstrong's voice came in low, carrying the first verse the way he always did, unhurried, each word given room to land. The crowd, by instinct, quieted to listen, the way audiences do during the parts of a performance they've been waiting for. In the front rows, people who had seen him perform this exact song before in other cities, other years, found themselves mouthing along quietly, the way people do with songs that feel like they belong to them, too. And then, without warning, in the middle of the second verse, Armstrong's microphone went dead. There was no dramatic pop, no feedback, no obvious signal that something had gone wrong. The sound simply stopped. Armstrong's voice, which had filled the arena a moment earlier, vanished from the speakers entirely, leaving only the band behind him, still playing, still audible through their own amplification, but without the voice that had been carrying the song. For a few seconds, the arena existed in a strange kind of half-silence. The band continued, the rhythm section keeping the song moving, but the melody, the part everyone had come to hear, had gone quiet. Armstrong, those close enough to see clearly remembered, didn't stop singing. His mouth kept moving. His body kept the same easy sway it always had during this song. But no sound reached the room beyond the first few rows, where people could just barely hear his unamplified voice carrying across the gap. In the higher sections of the arena, where most of the crowd sat, there was only the band, the empty space where the voice should have been, and a growing murmur of confusion rippling outward as people realized something had gone wrong. Backstage, technicians scrambled toward the sound equipment, checking cables, switching connections, doing the kind of fast, practiced troubleshooting that happens during a live show when something fails, and there's no time to stop and explain. But repairs like this take time, sometimes only seconds, but seconds that, on a stage in front of thousands of people, can stretch into something that feels enormous. What happened in those seconds is the part of the story that those who were there still talk about. Somewhere in the crowd, no one could ever agree on exactly where or who started it, a voice picked up the verse Armstrong had been singing. Then another voice joined it. Then another. Within just a few seconds, what had begun as a handful of scattered voices became something larger. Not a roar, not the kind of noise a crowd makes when they're excited, but something closer to an actual performance. Thousands of people singing the words to "When the Saints Go Marching In," together, in time with the band, filling the exact space where Armstrong's voice had been. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. Voices came in at slightly different times. Some people knew every word, and others only the chorus. And the overall sound had the slightly ragged, overlapping quality of any large group singing without rehearsal. But it was, by every account, unmistakably a real performance. An entire arena, without being asked, stepping in to finish a song for the man who had started it. The sound built section by section, spreading outward from wherever it had begun, until it felt less like an audience reacting and more like a second band that had been waiting the entire night for its turn. Armstrong, those near the stage remembered, stopped singing for a moment when he realized what was happening. Not because his microphone had failed. He had already adjusted to that, the way performers learn to adjust to almost anything over a long enough career, but because of what he was hearing instead. thousands of people in a room built for sports and spectacle, singing his song back to him, word for word, without any cue, without any need for him to lead them. He stood there for a moment, trumpet at his side, listening. Those close enough to see his face described an expression that wasn't quite surprise, and wasn't quite anything that had an easy name. Something between recognition and something quieter, something closer to being moved by a room full of strangers in a way that even decades of performing hadn't fully prepared him for. By the time the technicians restored the sound, and accounts suggest it took less than a minute, though to those in the room it felt much longer, the song had already changed shape. When Armstrong's voice returned through the speakers, he didn't simply pick up where he had left off. He let the crowd continue for another moment, listening, before easing his voice back in alongside theirs, not over them, but with them, the way a second voice joins a song already in progress rather than restarting it. For the rest of the number, the song belonged to both of them, Armstrong's voice and the audience's, woven together in a way that no rehearsal, no arrangement, no set list could have produced on purpose. The band, sensing what was happening, didn't rush to bring things back to normal. They let the moment breathe, extending the song slightly longer than usual, giving the crowd's voices room to be part of the recording that existed only in the memories of everyone present. When the song finally ended, the response from the crowd wasn't simply applause. It was the kind of sound a room makes when something has happened that everyone present understands they were lucky to be part of. Sustained, warm, almost disbelieving. The sound of thousands of people realizing, all at once, that they had just become part of the performance, rather than simply watching it. Armstrong, by most accounts, didn't make a big production of what had just occurred. He didn't stop the show to comment on it, didn't turn it into a speech about the audience or the meaning of the moment. He simply nodded, a small, warm acknowledgement, and moved into the next song, the way a man does when something has happened that doesn't need explaining to the people who were there, because they already understand it better than any explanation could. But the story didn't end when the concert did. In the days and weeks that followed, those who had been in the arena that night told the story to friends, to family, to anyone who asked what the concert had been like. And the story they told wasn't really about the technical failure at all. It was about what happened because of it. A microphone going dead by itself was nothing, the kind of small malfunction that happens at concerts all the time and is usually forgotten within minutes. What made this night different was what filled the silence. In the years afterward, when people who study moments like this tried to explain why it mattered, they often returned to the same idea, that what happened that night revealed something about Armstrong's audiences that audiences themselves may not have fully realized until it was tested. The songs Armstrong sang weren't simply things people listened to. They were things people carried, memorized without trying, absorbed through years of records and radio and repetition, until the words existed somewhere just beneath conscious thought, ready to surface the moment they were needed. For Armstrong himself, the moment likely became one of countless memories from a career built almost entirely out of nights like this one. Nights in arenas and clubs and concert halls across the world, each one slightly different, each one eventually fading into the general shape of a life spent performing. But those who knew him well during this period suggested that nights like this one, small, unplanned, impossible to repeat, were exactly the kind of thing that reminded him why he had never stopped touring, even decades into a career that had already made him famous beyond almost anyone's expectations. What the silence revealed, in the end, wasn't a flaw in the performance. It was the opposite. It was proof that the connection between Louis Armstrong and the people who came to hear him sing didn't depend on a microphone or a sound system or anything that could break down on a given night. It depended on something that had been built slowly over decades, song by song, until it had become strong enough to fill a room on its own, the moment it was asked to. And somewhere in that arena, for the length of one verse, the distance between performer and audience disappeared entirely. Not because Louis Armstrong gave something to the crowd that night, but because, for a few seconds, the crowd gave something back to him. And he simply stood there, listening, the way anyone does when they hear something they didn't know they needed to hear.